If you hold only 50 XRP, listen very carefully, because what I am about to show you is something the average investor will not understand until after the event has already unfolded. XRP has entered a phase that the institutions have been preparing for quietly, a phase where circulating supply is tightening, where liquidity is shifting off exchanges, and where scarcity stops being a theory and becomes a reality. And according to a former IMF digital settlement advisor, the window we are entering is unlike anything the XRP ecosystem has seen before. Welcome back to Matrix Millionaire. Before we get deeper into this, hit like so this video reaches more XRP holders. Subscribe if you refuse to stay blind to the truth, and drop a comment telling me if you are holding long-term or short-term. And as always, nothing in this video is financial advice. It is informational, it is analytical, and you, not me, are responsible for your decisions. Crypto moves quickly, and markets can change without warning. Right now, as I record this, XRP is trading in the low double-digit cent range, tightening in volatility, with deeper pockets quietly absorbing liquidity beneath the surface. Retail sees nothing. Institutions see the exact setup they have been waiting for. But what matters most here is not price, it is supply. XRP does not have unlimited float. It does not have infinite liquidity. It does not have endless sell pressure. And a former IMF settlement advisor explained something that made the entire picture click into place. The system is entering a phase where XRP becomes consumed, not traded. He explained that in every tokenized settlement network, once corridors activate, liquidity stops circulating the way the public expects. Instead, it gets locked into rails, held by institutions, not retailers. XRP becomes infrastructure rather than speculation. And once that shift begins, the available supply drops faster than most people realize. This is the core of the scarcity event. If you hold 50 XRP, that might sound small, but it is not small when the system transitions, because scarcity is not about the number you hold. It is about the number available, and the number available is shrinking. Here is the part that matters most. The IMF advisor said global liquidity standards are changing. Tokenized assets are accelerating faster than settlement rails can keep up. Treasury systems are strained. Cross-border bottlenecks are increasing. And when that happens, institutions begin shifting into neutral bridge assets in advance, absorbing supply quietly, without announcing it. That supply rarely returns to the open market. It becomes part of the settlement layer. This is where the scarcity event begins. You can already see the early signs: wallet clustering in key regions, deeper off-exchange accumulation, corridors showing pre-activation patterns, and Ripple's silence aligning perfectly with integration cycles. Retail thinks nothing is happening, but anyone who has studied institutional behavior, especially someone from the IMF settlement world, knows these are the exact signs of a supply tightening event. And here is your retention spike, because this next part changes everything. The IMF advisor said scarcity does not begin when price moves. It begins when liquidity stops moving, when whales stop selling, when institutions start holding, when supply shifts from public markets into private rails. Price reacts after, not before. This means if you hold 50 XRP, your positioning is far more significant than you realize, not because of the size, but because of the timing. The scarcity event is not something that slowly appears over years. It happens in silence, behind the scenes, until one day the system flips, and retail suddenly realizes that the public float is a fraction of what it once was. You are not waiting for hype. You are watching supply vanish quietly while the world is distracted. And once this scarcity event is fully underway, everything changes. To understand why holding only 50 XRP suddenly matters, you have to understand the mechanism behind this scarcity event. Because it is not emotional, it is not speculative, and it is not something that retail investors can see on the chart. Scarcity at the institutional level isn't created by price movement. It is created by structural absorption, by demand that moves XRP off exchanges and into private corridors, where it no longer returns to circulation. The former IMF digital settlement advisor explained something most investors never think about. When a settlement asset becomes part of real institutional plumbing, its available supply contracts permanently. Banks do not flip assets back onto the market. Payment providers do not sell their bridge liquidity once they integrate. Once XRP is assigned to a corridor, it becomes part of that corridor. It is not a trading asset anymore. It is infrastructure. And infrastructure does not get liquidated during hype cycles. Infrastructure is locked. This means every new corridor that activates does not just use XRP. It removes XRP from the public float. Every institution that prepares for tokenized settlement does not trade XRP. They accumulate it, allocate it, and freeze it into their systems. The IMF advisor said that in every liquidity network transition, the early phase looks exactly like what XRP is experiencing now. Silence, sideways movement, declining sell-side depth, and a slow but constant migration of supply from public exchanges to private wallets. Retail investors think scarcity is about a burn event or a sudden supply shock, but that is not how it works in real institutional architecture. Scarcity happens quietly, through slow systemic consumption. By the time the public realizes what has happened, the float is already fractioned. Look closely at the on-chain behavior. Deep wallet transfers into clustered regions in Asia and the Middle East, dormant accounts becoming active with accumulation patterns, and controlled movement into institutional-grade storage. These are not traders. These are not speculators. These are parties preparing for a world where XRP is no longer an asset, but a requirement. And all of this is happening while tokenization is accelerating faster than settlement rails can support. Governments are tokenizing bonds. Corporations are tokenizing money markets. Banks are exploring tokenized deposits. But tokenization without instant settlement is worthless. And that is the exact problem XRP solves. As the advisor explained, settlement is the choke point of the financial system. Once tokenized assets scale, the choke point becomes unbearable. You cannot have trillion-dollar tokenized markets settling on rails built for the 1970s. So institutions prepare early, long before the public understands the transition. They accumulate settlement assets like XRP long before the new rails go live. They move supply off exchanges before anyone feels urgency. And by the time the shift becomes obvious, the public float is already dramatically smaller. This is why 50 XRP matters. Because the value of a settlement asset is not based on how much you hold. It is based on how little becomes available once the system transitions. The scarcity event does not elevate holders by quantity. It elevates holders by timing, by being positioned before the float contracts, by holding something that institutions will soon need in amounts far larger than what is available. This mechanism is not speculative. It is mathematical. Once demand enters a system with a fixed supply, the repricing happens suddenly, not gradually, because the system cannot function without the asset. Utility does not ask for market permission. It forces repricing when the rails go live. And make no mistake, the rails are nearly ready. Ripple's silence has always aligned with integration phases. Wallet clustering has always aligned with corridor activation. Liquidity compression has always aligned with institutional preparation. These signals are not random. They are structural, and they are appearing again. If you hold only 50 XRP, you are positioned inside an event most people will only recognize after it is already over. Because scarcity is not coming. It has begun. The moment you understand how institutions think, the entire XRP scarcity event suddenly becomes clear. Retail looks at 50 XRP and thinks it is nothing. Institutions look at 50 XRP and understand what it means when the available float collapses. Because institutions know something retail never learns. The market does not reward the biggest holders. It rewards the earliest positioned. Right now, retail is in disbelief. They see sideways movement and assume nothing is happening. They see quiet charts and assume the story is over. They scroll through social media and think XRP has been forgotten. But that is exactly when the real players move. Whales are not emotional. Institutions are not impatient. They thrive in silence. They accumulate when others are bored. They position themselves when nobody is watching. And once the system flips, they never chase. They trigger. This is why the behavior on-chain looks the way it does. Clustering wallets, deep pocket accumulation, supply shifting off exchanges, large accounts absorbing liquidity at levels retail ignores. These patterns are not random. They are the signature of a market transitioning from speculation to infrastructure. And once XRP becomes infrastructure, the float will never behave the same again. The former IMF settlement advisor explained that institutional adoption is never loud in the beginning. It is quiet, methodical, and invisible to retail. But once tokenized markets scale, and they are scaling right now, the settlement layer must evolve with them. And that evolution forces demand toward the asset capable of bridging global liquidity instantly. The moment that demand enters, the public float gets absorbed, and scarcity becomes undeniable. This is the point most people miss. Scarcity does not start at the top of a bull run. Scarcity starts when the market is asleep. It starts when supply stops moving. It starts when the asset becomes more valuable for its utility than for its trading potential. And XRP is crossing that line now. You can already feel the shift. Ripple is silent. Corridors are preparing. Tokenization is accelerating. Global liquidity is tightening. Cross-border settlement is reaching a breaking point. And while all of this unfolds, retail is distracted, exactly as institutions prefer. If you hold 50 XRP, the most important thing to understand is that scarcity does not care about your stack size. It cares about your timing. If you are holding before the supply contracts, you are positioned. Once the corridors absorb liquidity, once tokenized settlement activates, once institutions lock their XRP into their internal rails, the market will not wait for retail to understand. Price does not rise politely. It reprices violently when utility forces it to. And when that repricing happens, the people holding any amount, even 50 XRP, will be holding something the world suddenly realizes it needs, but can no longer easily access. That is what a scarcity event looks like. It is silent, it is slow, and then all at once. And most of the world only understands it in hindsight. But you are hearing it now, before it happens. You are seeing what others ignore, and you are positioned in a way most people will never be. If you made it to the end of this video, type the word scarcity in the comments, so I know you are part of the few who see what is coming, instead of the many who sleep through it. That one word helps the algorithm, strengthens this community, and shows you are awake in a moment most people are not. Tap like so more XRP holders understand the truth. Subscribe to Matrix Millionaire so you never miss the next warning. And drop scarcity in the comments right now. The supply is tightening, the float is shrinking, and the world is not ready for what happens next.